Ernest Cline, welcome to the Game Informer Show, sir. Big swig of water.
Oh, yep. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, honor to have you. You know, we've talked about the movie in a bonus episode that we posted last week and whatnot. The overwhelming sensation is like, this movie's insane. And at a certain level, you just have to give it up that this thing got made and that your passion in particular led to this insane film being released from Warner Brothers.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's the least likely thing ever to happen, especially to a kid who grew up, on Steven Spielberg movies. It's I'm still trying to process it. He signed on to do the movie about almost 3 years ago exactly, and it's just been the craziest and best 3 years of my life.
Oh my gosh. So this is what I'm a huge Spielberg fan as well. And I feel like if I was working with him, I would just constantly watch him every meeting I had and wait for like, when's the genius coming out? When is he going to make a move or like make a decision that's unlike anything I could have predicted and it pays off? So like specifically, what was the first time we realized like, there's that Spielberg magic in a meeting, in a discussion, anything like that?
Well, just the way he treats people, it's partly like once you start to talk to him, once you calm down and get over the fact that you're hanging out with Steven Spielberg, then you realize, one of the reasons he is Steven Spielberg is because he's such a kind and generous person and such a great collaborator. Like I thought I was the biggest movie fan in existence, but his knowledge and love of cinema just dwarfs mine and anyone I've ever met. He lights up when you start talking about movies and video games. He's a lifelong gamer too, and has such a real passion for video games. So I don't know, like his genius manifests itself in the end product on screen. I don't know if you, watching him set up shots and also watching him work with actors. I think that's when I saw his genius really in action, because he's so good at getting what he wants and helping the actors become live into their characters. He's like a natural. Like he was born to make movies.
Yeah. I mean, how much did you talk about video games with him? I know he goes way back. He's been playing since the origin of the entire medium and whatnot. But did you ever talk about his games in particular, like Boom Blocks or that LMNO project he was working on with EA?
I didn't talk with him about that. I talked with him about the director's chair CD-ROM game that he made back in the day. It was where Quentin Tarantino was one of the actors in it. It was a crazy early days of CD-ROM game that I remember playing because I wanted to make movies someday. So I talked with him about that. But when we talk about video games, it was mostly in the context of the games in the movie and his own history and relationship with video games, which is amazing. When I first went to Amblin, one of the interviews that I had was in this room at Amblin that had been built as an arcade, like with all these classic arcade game alcoves built into it. He used to have like a 9 or 10 classic arcade games in the 80s in Amblin that he would go in and play between meetings. And he told me this great story about being obsessed with Missile Command and wanting to break 1,000,000 points on Missile Command, but he couldn't do it in time before he had to leave and go shoot ET. So he had them haul his Missile Command cabinet out into the forest, and he hooked it up to the production generators. And then while in between they're setting up shots in the Redwood Forest to do ET, he would go over and play Missile Command. And that was when he finally broke 1,000,000 points, was out in the forest playing Missile Command off the generator. I'm like, you're the guy, Steven Spielberg. You too were destined to make this movie.
So, I mean, the game is packed, or the movie's packed with video game Easter eggs and whatnot all over the place, beyond Easter eggs, obviously. But I mean, were there any that he wasn't familiar with, but he's had to trust that maybe some more modern gamers on the site would understand? Like, I don't know if he's necessarily an Overwatch fan, but those characters are all over in the film. Were those situations where he's like, I don't know what this is, but I'll trust that you guys know, and I'll go ahead and put it in?
Yeah, well, he wasn't too concerned with the Easter eggs and the stuff. A lot of that stuff was hidden even without his knowledge. Like his concern was always the main characters and the main story. And the way he described it is all those Easter eggs and kind of cameos are in the side view mirrors. But if you look straight ahead, it's always our story and our race to get the Easter egg and our characters. And if you look straight ahead, you can always focus on that. And the other stuff is not really part of the main story. So I know that when he was doing like his final run through of checking special effects shots to lock the print, he spotted stuff that they had snuck in there, like a gremlin. He spotted a gremlin in one shot that he had not approved, that somebody at ILM had snuck in there, and he's like, well, it's too late to take it out now. Like there was a lot of that, a lot of people, me and Zach Penn, the other writer, and Adam Stockhausen, like sneaking references to his own movies in the background. But the video game stuff, a lot of that was. So I play Overwatch all the time with my daughter. She freaked out when she found out we were going to have Tracer in the movie, and I think Mercy might be in there too. But it was kind of up to us to pick the different stuff in the background, which was some of the most fun that I've ever had.
Yeah, and I know. Yeah. No, in terms of like choosing what to put in the background, I know you're a huge Valve fan. Did you reach out about getting some Portal or Half-Life Easter eggs in there?
I did not. That was not my job to reach out. There was like a whole army of people reaching out to get. Yeah. I know there's Battleborn stuff in there. There's lots of Borderlands stuff from my friends up in Dallas.
Yeah.
So there's stuff. I've seen this movie, I want to say 8 or 9 times now with different audiences, and I haven't spotted I spot new stuff. The last time I was watching it, I spotted an X-Wing that I didn't even know.
That's a biggie.
was in the movie flying into the distracted globe because at one point we thought we weren't going to have any Star Wars references, and then at some point Disney said, okay, you can have a few, and so now there are a few stuck in there that I wasn't even aware of. So it's a surprise even for me. I can't wait to get the Blu-ray and go through it scene by scene.
That's how you know it's a dense movie, is when there's an X-Wing in it and it's not front and center. It's like, yeah, I guess we got room off to the side for you, X-Wing, right. Maybe if we have time.
And the X-Wing is flying with Serenity from Firefly and a dropship from Aliens and a Lambda shuttle from Star Wars. It's crazy, dude.
It seems like you'd be up for reading a lot of feedback. Have you just been consuming everything since this movie has come out? What is that process like of trying to sift through discussions, reviews, everything like that?
Yeah, I have not looked at that at all.
Really?
I've been traveling to Japan and England and Los Angeles and doing press junkets for the past 3 weeks. So I've been talking about the movie and going to different premieres. I went to the London premiere and the LA premiere. We had a big premiere at South by Southwest here in Austin. So I'm still kind of recovering. I just, they tell me that about the numbers for the opening weekend, but beyond that, I haven't been paying attention. I'm kind of exhausted. And I knew enough to, I saw the movie and I've seen it with a couple different crowds, both in London and in Austin and in LA, and just the reaction of seeing it with a crowd is so amazing. That's really all I needed to hear was the crowd lose its mind.
Yeah.
Multiple times, enough to know that the right kind of people are going to love this movie and want to watch it over and over again. It's not a movie for everybody, but it's for, a lot of people. The right kind of people are going to love it.
So you haven't had that moment yet where you're driving home and just burst into tears when you realize what the hell you've accomplished here?
Oh, no, it's like that analogy of a frog being boiled,
Sure.
It'll jump out if you dump it in hot water, but if you slowly heat it up, you can, and I'm like the frog that's slowly being boiled, and, I haven't jumped out yet, but it's, no, it's just an amazing experience. I tell everybody, I assume it's all going to be downhill for me from here on out, because what could, cool things might happen and I might get to make other movies, but nothing is going to top this. My first novel, Steven Spielberg made my first novel into my favorite Steven Spielberg movie. He used a song from my wedding as the end credits. I win for all time. I just need to I'm just going to try to chill out and relax it and enjoy it.
Really? Your new favorite Spielberg movie? You can say that confidently?
Oh my God, well, it's a whole different experience, like all the other movies, I wasn't there on the set, I wasn't a part of the experience of making it. And so when I watch Ready Player One, not only do I see this amazing movie that's unlike any movie I've ever seen in my entire life, but I got to help make that movie. And there are all these memories, associated with it, and conversations with Steven and things that I see, and here's the end product. So it's like a work of art that I got to make with one of my favorite artists, based on a story that I conceived. It just, it can't help but be my favorite Steven Spielberg movie. And it's the one that, touches on all my interests. It's kind of everything that I love, and it's so much of what he loves. Like, he is a big fan of movies and video games and pop culture as well, and he has his own unique relationship with it that just only added to the texture of my story. So yeah, my favorite, and will always be my favorite.
That's awesome. So since you've had like basically a second draft of Ready Player One now, working on the screenplay, do you feel like the film touches different themes than the book? Do you feel like it has a different message ultimately than the book? And what is that process like to have two versions of your baby at this point?
Well, and it's that way, I think, for any author that has a book made into a film. Stephen has a pretty great record with book to film adaptations like Jaws and Jurassic Park, like some of the best ever done. So, and I think all the themes that are expressed in the movie, they're there in the book. He brings different things to the forefront, but all the dialogue from the characters, most of it is right from the book, especially as deals with, the theme of striking a balance between fantasy and reality. That's the thing. It's not an anti-escapism story or an anti-video game story or any of that. For me, it's about striking a balance, because now we have the internet, which is kind of our 2018 version of the Oasis, and video games and movies. There's more choices for escapism and more immersive escapism than there has ever been in human history. And so it's very easy to escape from reality, and also very appealing right now to want to escape from reality. So I think that's why it ends up being a very timely story. Stephen has a talent for picking movies with themes and topics that touch on kind of right about what's going on with us right now. And you mix in escapism and net neutrality and just our own relationships with the internet and the way the internet is changing our culture and changing our politics and changing our society in unforeseen ways. Like for me, that's what the best science fiction always does, is it takes technology and extrapolates how it's going to evolve and affect our lives and our human relationships in the future. And so I think he brings all of that out in the film. It's all touched on in the book, but kind of I touch on a lot of things. And so he had to pick certain themes about escapism and also kind of regret and we weave them into the story. It's all there in the book, and also the relationships and the way that each characters are kind of grappling with some facet of their personality that they maybe aren't happy with, but in their Oasis avatar, they can erase that, or not have it be an issue, which is something that we already all do. We all have a Twitter or Instagram or Facebook profile that is not us. It's an idealized version of us that we put online to show to other people. And we curate that. And that's what, your Oasis avatar is. It's a idealized version of yourself that you can use to interact with other people. So all those themes that are in the book, they come out in the movie. Not everything that's in the book comes forward in the movie, but I think he picked the essential heart of the story, and that comes through really nicely. Yeah.
So back in 2015, you did an interview with my coworker Ben Reeves for Game Informer magazine, and I want to read a quote back to you. This is July 2015. In 2015, you said, "I think Steven Spielberg directing Ready Player One is going to change the course of human history." Those are some bold words, dude. And so now, post the movie's release, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about how it's going to jumpstart VR or possibly affect the industry?
Yeah, well, the book already has changed the speed with which VR, I think, has been adapted, but that's minuscule compared to the influence this movie will have. I know Ready Player One has been influential to people at Oculus and Vive and Google, because they've told me, and they've had me come and do book signings and told me that they handed out to new employees as part of a new employee package, at Oculus. I remember going and I got this when I came on board, as part of my welcome to Oculus package. So that's really flattering, but I think that that's minuscule compared to the influence that this movie will have. People all around the world, millions and millions and millions of people are watching this movie right now and are going to be inspired and influenced by it to try virtual reality and to seek it out and maybe to work in it. And help bring something like the Oasis about. So many different virtual reality companies and people working on haptics and everything else are constantly reaching out to me, because they're trying to, everybody says we're trying to make the Oasis, and everybody is, but nothing is, it reminds me of Top Gun. When Top Gun came out in the 80s, it Navy recruitment numbers went through the roof. It ended up changing the whole fighter pilot community in the Navy, because so many people joined up who were nothing like people who had signed up before. All because of Top Gun. Movies can have a profound effect on the culture and on what people are interested in. And I think Ready Player One is a 2.5-hour commercial for the potential promise and pitfalls of virtual reality. And it's directed by Steven Spielberg. It's clearly going to change the speed with which our civilization adopts virtual reality.
Yeah.
I don't think it's up for debate.
Interesting. So talking about the tech within the movie, the VR tech, there's a lot of people getting nitpicky about like, I don't understand how this works. The locomotion seems all over the place. So in your mind, do you see like just the goggles as, not literally how you imagine VR is going to be in the year 2040 or whatever, or do you imagine that is a literal depiction of like, yeah, it's going to be something like that?
Well, the VR and the locomotion as depicted in the movie is very much like it's depicted in my book. Like when Wade doesn't get an omnidirectional treadmill until much later in the story. He starts out kind of in his van sitting in a chair, and he moves his avatar with hand motions or with a controller, which is something that I always depicted. And that's what you see in the movie is you see people accessing the Oasis with all different levels of technology. Like Sorrento has an immersion chair that closes him up inside of it. But other people are just out on the street. And the people out on the street who are in virtual reality, I remember having a discussion with different people in the movie about this, is that the idea is that those headsets are VR/AR headsets. And I talked with Palmer, Lucky, and some other people about this, and I think this might be something that evolves. Like if you have an AR VR headset that also has a pass-through camera, it could map the environment around you, like buildings and cars and things, and show them kind of like your room capture does now. It shows you like wireframes of those things so that you can avoid bumping into them. So if you had that in a wireless VR headset, you wouldn't need a room capture camera. Like that would be built into the camera. And so you could use any environment that you're in as your capture volume, as your capture space. So that's when I see those people like running, with the Halo Spartans.
Right.
Like my idea is that like even though they're out in the street, they can still see wireframes of the buildings and things so they don't run into them. And then they can use any open space out in the world as their capture space.
So that is literal. You didn't see it as like a retro throwback to have the visors, and that was part of the charm?
Well, the visors were a little bigger than I think that they'll be. But the trade-off is, maybe the visors are bigger because now they have to contain a bunch of other technology, like having the capture volume. Like here in my office, I have Vive cameras, and I also have Oculus set up to kind of triangulate and track my body. But eventually, that could be built into your visor, or built into, you could have tracking cameras set up in public spaces, that your visor could sync to, and then use existing tracking cameras to track you. All kinds of possibilities that, I think you could explain how they're doing what they're doing. But primarily, Stephen wanted to just create a lot of intercutting between people in the real world. Like somebody will reach for something in the Oasis, and then you see them reaching for it in the real world, which is how VR works. But the details, I think we maybe bent the rules of how we currently use virtual reality for storytelling purposes, but I think all of what you see in the movie could definitely be possible at some point. People can agree to disagree about that. Yeah.
Float dancing will be tricky, but maybe in some way it'll work.
Maybe in some way, when you combine what Magic Leap is working on with Oculus and Vive and what everybody is working on, eventually you're going to have, I think, glasses, that can go opaque and put you completely inside the Oasis, or have augmented reality that draws the Oasis onto existing surfaces.
Right.
That's the thing. Like if you could access the Oasis with a Magic Leap camera, then you would just turn your office into the Oasis, and it would look like the Oasis to you, as opposed to. So there's lots of different possibilities and different ways that I think we're going to access virtual worlds through technology that hasn't been invented yet. And that's the thing about predicting technology 10, 20, 30 years in the future. You're always wrong, because I was wrong with Ready Player One when I sold it in 2010. Like Oculus was going to be founded the very next summer. The same summer Ready Player One was published, Oculus was founded, and things have accelerated much faster than I anticipated since then. That's the perils of being a science fiction writer.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, since the book came out, you've been the go-to nostalgia guy. Do you feel bizarre about that? Do you ever get tapped out from your own nostalgia? Do you find yourself like mining your childhood, trying to find out, is there any new vein that I haven't tapped in for that sweet Russia nostalgia?
Well, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so I'm naturally nostalgic for that time. I think whatever decade you grow up in, and you come of age, that's the decade in which you develop your world view, and you fall in love for the first time, and you kind of formulate as a personality. So you're always going to be nostalgic for that time. But for me, the 80s are special for a whole list of different reasons that have to do with technology and have to do with this modern information age and the world that we live in 2018. I feel like that all started in the 80s. You know, by being born in the 70s and growing up when I did, I was part of the first generation to have home video games, period. You know, I was born the same year Pong was invented. And when I was 6 years old was when the Atari 2600 came out. So I was part of the first generation to have video games, first generation to have home video games, first generation to have home computers with a modem that you could dial out and connect to another computer, first generation to have Walkman, like portable music that you could just listen to on your own, first generation to have VCRs, which was huge. You know, suddenly I had access to the whole world library of cinema and not just what was playing on television or the movies. Like the whole culture that we live in now, where you have instant access to media and information and are able to connect computers to each other, all of that began in the 80s. So where we are now, like being nostalgic for the 80s is like being nostalgic for the birth and the dawn of the internet and the information age. Yeah. And it's when we started to develop online personas, you know, and it's crazy between between like 1996 and 2006, the internet went from something that hardly anyone had ever used to something that everyone is using every second of every day. And you're tethered to it with a wireless computer now that keeps you connected to the internet at all times. So that's all. And now it's changed how we meet people, how we interact with each other. Yeah. All of it, all in the space of 10 years. So imagining how that's going to change our lives in 30 years. And once the internet is wrapped around all your senses, and when you log onto the internet, you're inside of it, like in Neuromancer and Snow Crash, it's very easy to imagine things evolving, you know, but you're never exactly right. But I think sure, a lot of it will come true.
Yeah. Do you think there's any connection between people that are more nostalgic in general and being scared of death? Do you think there's a one-to-one there?
I don't know, man. The grave waits for us all. There's no denying. Thanks, and that's part of the human experience. That's part of the human dilemma, you know, the existential dilemma that we all have. Like once you reach a certain age, you're like, oh, I'm going to die. Everybody I know is going to die. Everything is transient and impermanent. And, you know, what will I leave behind? That's part of the challenge of being a human being once you make those realizations. And so that's why I think escapism and nostalgia, but escapism, especially nostalgia, is just another form of escapism. Video games, movies, music, books, poetry, whatever you use as a mental and emotional release, those are the things that you stay alive for. Those are what make life worth living and connect people. You know, that's what I think. Any facet of culture, be it video games or movies or nostalgia for the 80s, anything that like different human beings share, and then sharing that love connects them. That's a good thing. You know, anybody who shits on things that bring other people joy, like you're not making the world a better place. Like, yeah, if it doesn't bring you joy, I'm sorry, but if you see that it clearly brings millions of other people joy and you still hate it, then you're part of the problem, in my opinion. You know, like if you can't say something nice, you know, but that but that's, you know, that's the way that I feel. Like if you're an enthusiastic person and share your joy with the world, like that's how I got where I am, you know, not by being like negative and like not that great. Like meh is like my least favorite word. Like least favorite word. Like what do you that's what you have to contribute, you know, and that's what a lot of people have to contribute is meh.
Yeah, it is fun to see Ready Player One in the theater and just to have that communal reaction. Like, there's several moments without spoiling in the movie where people lost their effing minds in my theater, and it's like it's pretty rare to get that big of a reation in a movie. So, congratulations, man!
Thank you. Like when Wade throws a Hadoken, like at Sorrento, like sure. Oh my god! Like, have you ever seen that in a movie before? No. Like,
it's definitely a lot of fun. Well, hey, Ernest, Cline, thank you so much for your time, man. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, man.
Thank you so much for watching this excerpt from the Game Informer Show podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version and listen to new episodes airing every Thursday. We cover big games on the horizon, games that we've just reviewed. We have long-form developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So check it out every Thursday.